Welcome back to the Winner Circle, where I am here today with Chris from Atlantic.net. They are the leaders in cloud providers. They've been around for, they practically invented cloud computing. And Chris is the director of support services. They've just won an Excellence in Customer Service Award, and he's going to walk us through the transformation of the year. Chris, welcome to the show, and congratulations on the award.
Yeah, thank you. We've worked really hard, and we're going to continue to keep pushing down that road to even greater milestones, I believe. So we're very excited, and we're really enjoying our transition from. We just moved data centers, so we're transitioning and doing a lot of sort of going back and making sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, things of that nature. So.
Well, and we were just talking about Atlantic.net. They've been around forever, it seems like. I remember them from, the late 90s. I think I was starting to compete with them on certain services. I was in similar businesses. And we were talking about how you still had some email customers who, they like the simplicity of it. And, email's a hard thing to transition because you're so wrapped into it, especially older people are so wrapped into it, that it's kind of like changing data centers. So walk us through, give us like the elevator pitch on Atlantic.net and kind of your role before we get into this transformation that you guys just went through.
Sure. So, Atlantic.net is really, I look at us as a place where you come when you need to have infrastructure, for your cloud service, for your colocation or, dedicated services, things like that. And you need the infrastructure, but you don't really want to be in the infrastructure business. So you kind of let us, sort of jump in and help with managing that. We also, offer managed services so we can kind of help keep your infrastructure, stable, growing, keep you ahead of, any potential technical issues that might come along. And yeah, I'm the director of support services. I came along about a year and a half ago, just as we were in the middle of a pretty significant move from one data center to another. So had to step right into all the complications and challenges that go along with that, while also, looking at the business as a whole and saying, all right, what do we do well? What can we improve upon? And, the transformation from my point of view was really starting there, which was just looking at our people and our processes and, figuring out how we could, I would say, build that into a more significant value proposition for our clients. And really just started kind of picking apart all the details, looking at how we manage the workflow coming in, looking at how we're responding to our customers, looking at how we're advising them on, what we think are the best solutions for what they're trying to accomplish. So
we keep talking about this transformation. So that's the award you were recognized for was this customer service transformation of the year. When you've been there for a year and a half, what was kind of the starting point? What made you kind of look at the support organization and decide that, something needed to change?
Well, I've been doing this a long time, and I always, like I said, I like to start with the people and the process. So I looked at, kind of how we were structured in terms of the way the teams are built out. What were they putting their attention on? Also, what were we doing well, and what were we not doing so well? The things that we were not doing so well, I basically just sat down with everyone and said, let's imagine a world where anything is possible. And so we started, essentially changing the way that we approach, problem solving for customers, making sure that we have standardized communication, but also not so standardized that it's cookie cutter. We also want to, one of the things that I think we're really focused on is that people component. So teaching the team, because it is technical folks, right? So they have a tendency to speak in tech speak pretty heavily, which isn't a bad thing, but it's also being able to sort of help them, understand, engaging with the audience, whoever that person or people may be, and meeting them at their level. Dialing it back if you see that, maybe there's some confusion there, and just giving them a sense of, it's okay for me not to read from a script. It's okay for me to, to use a little bit of creative problem solving, and I'll tell you, customers really prefer it. They love it. They love people that actually talk to them like they're human, that, give them reasonable solutions, that tell them when things are difficult, but that we have a plan, so that was probably the very first thing. And so centered around that was a lot of, sort of training, retraining, rethinking how how we engage with our clients.
So
Yeah.
data center environments they're kind of like hospitals, right? They're 24/7, 365. Every support shift handoff is like a potential moment where customer experience kind of resets, right? You get a whole new
Yep.
shift.
Yep.
How is that showing up before you started making changes?
Well, it was kind of inconsistent, just as you might expect, with a lot of change going on. There was some, like you said, it's 24/7, 365. Staffing for that is not always an easy thing to do. What I discovered was I didn't get a sense that there was alignment with the, sort of the mindset of, I used to work, just for reference, I used to work in India. I would live there for 2 years. And so I had to work a third shift all the time. And I realized there was a particular mindset that people that like to work third shift had. So we had to start, sort of looking at everybody and saying, do you really want to be in this role? And so we started shuffling, people around, moving people to where they felt like they could be the most productive, and almost organically, but also with, a fair amount of structure, you start to see that the handoffs become smoother. We're not dropping customer requests or potentially slowing down on an issue that we should be able to resolve relatively quickly. So that was probably the biggest shift for us, was just getting the right people in the right seat at the right time.
Yeah. So let's walk
Yeah.
through the kind of the core of what you changed. You described it as a kind of a queue ownership with daily governance.
Mhm.
What does that actually look like operationally?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very simple. We have individuals that have responsibilities per shift as leads. We make sure that they're sort of managing uh, the intake as it's coming in, getting it organized, looking at it by priority, looking at it by timing. So when a request came in, what type of request it was, who's best suited to handle it on the next shift. And then just making sure that, again, that stays consistent, and that we always have also a backup plan in the event somebody's not present, sick, on vacation, or what have you. So it was really just as simple as that. It's not a complicated formula. It turns out if you just sort of stick to the basics, you can kind of keep customers moving pretty quickly.
Yeah, and in my experience, especially over the rapid change that we've seen in the last 20 years, and then the just the amazing change we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years with
Yeah.
AI. The amount of change in an organization is one thing. The amount of change in your customer's organization is a whole nother thing. And then you layer in all the change in tech that you're applying, and it's a whole, third thing. It really is a matter of training. You mentioned a lot of the training model needed to change too. And you talked about kind of turning capable technicians into customer ready communicators. How did you do that? And kind of what did you have to teach that wasn't there before?
Yeah, so I started by listening to phone calls. We record our calls. I started by listening to calls, reviewing the email communications that we have with our clients, because those are kind of the two main channels that they reach out to us. And just listening for what they were, what I felt like they were, doing well. Most of it was centered around the actual issue resolution. The part that I felt like needed some polish was, how like the very, very basics, like how sort of uh, greet them and get them prepared for you're about to solve their problem. How to de-escalate, a client who's feeling pretty frantic, and giving them a sense of, we've got this, we're in this with you. We're going to get it under control. And then being able to maintain control of the call. I mean, I literally had to build in a module that just was called owning the call as part of our onboarding, process. And we re-onboarded the entire group, and we just kind of went through scenarios, talked through, what their major pain points have been. And then we just practice, I mean, it seems like it should be, more elaborate than that, but it's not. It's really practice and then, execution.
No, everybody
And
wants to do a good job. And
yeah,
I was speaking with a company the other day that was literally building these AI avatar models to help doctors practice with patients, and to start allowing drug companies to basically develop those conversations so that they know kind of how the conversations are going to go, and they can train their doctors, and they can work on their literature based on kind of real conversations. So it is that training element, and that kind of practice is super important, because you need to know kind of what's going to come up and and how to communicate back. So it's super important. Now you kind of standardized escalation paths, and like I'm sure you have communication templates that made everything a lot easier too. Um, a lot of people kind of push back on that type of stuff. How did you guys get buy-in from the team that this was kind of the new method that we were rolling with?
So I started off by sitting with the team, reading the reading the sort of the path, the documented model that we had, and then I would just ask, why do we do it that way? And I would get all types of answers. And what I would really listening for though was the sort of the subtext of the answer, which a lot of times might have been, well, we were just told this is how we had to do it, or this just makes it easier on us. And I'm like, guys, sometimes being easier on us is not better for our clients. Sometimes we got to do the hard stuff. So then I started to kind of walk them through like what that looks like. And as well, I would get myself involved directly with issues and be like, let's do this together. I'm going to show you what painful looks like until it becomes easy. And, in the course of doing that, they've just sort of naturally, and by the way, again, through the retraining, and also in some cases, I identified individuals who maybe this wasn't the right, place for them to really thrive. And I brought in some new individuals that just already had some of that sort of, I'll call it sort of a servant mindset when it comes to serving clients. And, they would push back. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. I remember we had an issue that happened at like 3:00 in the morning. And I didn't find out about it. This was right when I got here. I didn't find out about it until 6:00 the next morning when I got in. And it turned out I needed to know about it at 3:00 in the morning. So I got in and I'm immediately pulled into a conference call with a client who's pretty upset. And, we were able to de-escalate the scenario and get things sorted out. But then I went back and I was like, why didn't anybody call me? And they said, well, it was 3 a.m. We didn't want to bother you. I was like, guys, we're in the data center business. We're just like you said, we're just like a hospital. We're always on. If you have to call the CEO, call the CEO. You know what I mean? So I had to get them, comfortable with the idea that it's better to inconvenience somebody at the risk of, their sleep loss or something like that than it is to have a client feel like they're not getting the support they need. I mean, this is their livelihoods in many cases, their business. So
Yeah.
that was one of those moments where I was like, I don't want anybody to have a sense that they have to, just sit there and, by the way, take the abuse that they're getting because they don't have answers or they can't get answers. It's like, no, we're a team, man. If you're going to get, in the thick of this, we're going to get in the thick of this. So that's how we did it. That's how we're doing it now.
Yeah. That's a great mindset. It's really kind of that, aligning your support behaviors with the needs of the customers. And a lot of your customers are in these regulated industries like in healthcare, and it could be life or death. So that 24/7, 365,
Absolutely.
mindset is something that, customers are paying for. So it's
Well, I've
definitely.
gotten a call from a customer that said, listen, I'm serving doctors, man. These guys need access to my data without question as quickly as possible. And a minute of downtime is potentially catastrophic. So, no pressure, but but we're here for you. So we do it. And that's sobering. So, yeah.
So we'll talk about this. You transformed this team, which was really amazing. Like, great effort there, kind of organically changing with training and kind of doing some shifting, but kind of really developing a team mentality. And you did it in the midst of a massive data center migration. And I can't speak, enough about how hard these kind of migrations are, without
Yes.
any customer impact. I've been through a million of these, or, network transitions, data center transitions, whatever. And you're talking about these customers that have been with you for, some of them for 30 years, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Going on, and with it, so you're moving, from one platform to this new platform. Kind of walk us through the setup. You've now arrived into the middle of this. It's and you've had this extraordinary income of you've completed a full data center migration with no customer impacts attributed to the move. So, how did that support organization contribute to make that happen?
So the way I would characterize it was heavy on the teamwork. So, cross departmentally, we had to really be, in tune in terms of, communication to clients, reactions when something did, potentially happen. Having our contingency plans in place. The biggest piece I would say is we just made sure we were literally always, somebody was always listening. Somebody was always observing. And by listening and observing, what I mean there is, making sure that if somebody says, hey, we're about to make this change, please watch the following, and so our guys are dialed into that. If, something, and plus, by the way, we're doing normal course of business. So while they're trying to keep an eye on whatever transition is about to take place, I've got to make sure I've got people sort of in place for the regular call that comes in for the email customer that wants their password reset or something like that. So, managing that around the clock and doing a data center move was, it took a lot of coordination. And just, I will say this, it's probably the year that I've slept the least, but also the most rewarding year. Like I really, I look back and I'm just like, I love this team, man. Like they've really stepped into their, to their strengths, I would say.
Yeah, and when something like this happens, you go through something like this. You can get to a certain point, I find, and then the event itself takes everybody to a higher place, and you find that the momentum just keeps going, and so congratulations on that and all that hard work. You've seen this a lot in your career. You've been in a lot of different types of organizations. What's the single hardest habit to change in a support team that has, that's been doing something the same way for years? Across your experience, do you see it kind of one thing that's always kind of hard to change?
I think the hardest thing to change is giving people a sense that they're allowed to change things. Oftentimes, like you said, they've been doing it this way for years. And if I ask the question, well, why do we do it this way? They tell me, and then I say, why don't we change it? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, so that's one thing I like about Marty, our CEO, is he's like, Chris, if we don't like a thing, just change it. If it doesn't work, change it back and then find something else. And, when you have a leader like that, it just makes the job that much more fun because it's like you get to keep, you hear the term failing fast, right? So that's one of the things that we do too. We're like, let's just try this, see if it works. If we get any, blowback or something like that, let's pivot back to where we were, find the next thing. And that's really been the thing. But once those people learn that it's okay to do that, it's so much fun to even kind of sit back and watch, just watch them start to do it without without needing your thumbs up, that it's okay. So yeah, so that's probably the big thing.
Yeah, it's funny when people get enabled. I call that being enabled, right? It's like, I have the authority to do this. It feels good. Now, you mentioned Trustpilot earlier, and you guys have these Trustpilot reviews that you specifically cited as kind of evidence in your nomination. Customers are naming your support quality directly. They're talking about your teams. Do you track that? And, how do you use that customer feedback in, continually improving your organization?
Yeah, in fact, that's probably something I throughout my career, I've not always been the biggest cheerleader. So in the past decade or so, I've really sort of taken a hold of that and realized the value of it and what it does for people. So we do track it. I do every time we get new surveys, good or bad, but mostly like to really highlight the good ones for letting everybody in the organization know that we have good feedback from a customer on our Trustpilot page. When we have the bad ones, we sit down, we figure out what we could have done better, and certainly we always re-engage with the customer to see how we can potentially correct the issue if there was one. But we heavily use it as a source of motivation. There's a little bit of a friendly competition amongst the team where everybody's trying to see who can who can get the most 5-star reviews. And I mean, that's only been in the last, I would say 10 or so months, that we really put our focus on it. And I mean, it's had, it's paid pretty good dividends in terms of the Trustpilot score that we have. I think we were at like a 3.7 or 3.8 when I first got here. We're up to 4.2, approaching 4.3. We just got another really good survey yesterday. So,
that's great. Those are hard numbers to move. I've had to do that in my organizations too. And
they are hard, right? And that's the other thing is, sharing with everybody that's a big deal when it moves by 0.1. Like they don't understand. They're like, well, that doesn't seem that impressive. I'm like, that's a lot.
That means a lot of 5s came in.
That's right. So,
because it doesn't go up with 4s, right?
It does not. In fact, if anything, that'll actually bring it down. That's true.
No,
so,
yeah. in a hosting environment, it seems like, you only talk to customers when there's something going wrong. How do you kind of reframe those moments as an opportunity?
Let's see. How do we reframe those moments? I would say, generally speaking, I always like to look at it from the perspective of, if if there's a problem, are we contributing to the problem in some way, whether it's you know by mistake, or is it something that the customer maybe just has a misunderstanding about? So I try to look at it from the perspective of, how are we looking at this issue, and are we, and what are we doing to make sure that we're focused on getting the outcome that the customer is expecting? And then in some cases, you even have to frame it and take them down the path of, to get what you need, here's what has to change. And it's, but there are different ways to get there. So I would just say that we try to frame it through the lens of, continuous improvement, I guess you would say. Just looking at it and saying, what could we have done? Are we doing it? If we are doing it, are we explaining it right? In some cases, the challenge is that it's not that the answer isn't correct. It's that it's not being delivered in a fashion that makes sense to the receiver. So it's like, well, then let's try again. That's another, by the way, aspect of one of the things that I had to change was, I was looking at these communications with our clients back and forth on email. And I was like, guys, after a couple of these, doesn't it make sense to just call them? They're like, well, we don't generally talk to these folks. I'm like, right, but try it. Let's see what happens, And invariably it's like, oh yeah, that got answered in a minute that we've been taking for 2 days, So those kinds of things are I think the way that we kind of turn the frame around on that, to say, when they're angry, it doesn't take a lot to actually make people happy. It's be consistent, maintain their trust through clear communication, giving them straight answers, and then delivering the end result. Really simple, I think.
Yeah. Now, Atlantic.net is moving aggressively into AI cloud infrastructure with your NVIDIA partnership and all the GPU hosting you guys are doing. How does that shape where customer support's need go, those needs kind of go with all this new kind of product and new technology?
I think, I guess the way that I'm seeing it at the moment is, again, just really making sure that we're being responsive. We're having to upskill in some areas, so we're spending time teaching the team, different, software and hardware, support methodologies and things of that nature. But by and large, it's really still going to be sort of holding true to this same framework. And then just adapting to whichever aspects of the technology are somewhat new, so to speak. But a lot of it is still the same. It's sort of like what you were saying to me earlier about, going from dial up to fiber, right? I mean, you still a lot of times have to deploy the same, problem solving approaches, just at a different level, and, with a little bit of a technical understanding.
Yeah. Now, if you were, director of support services in some other tech provider who's kind of seeing that their team's kind of technically strong, but their customer experience is inconsistent, what advice would you give them as they kind of look at that team?
Well, I would definitely say look at, what are their strengths? What are their individual strengths? Like, that's the other thing. You really do have to get into the weeds a little bit at first, so that you can make those transformative changes. So you need to really understand your team. I mean, if it's a team of 1,000, then you need to get with your direct leaders and tell them how we ought to get into the weeds a little bit, and show them how that ought to go. And then, just start identifying. I mean, it really is sort of a forensic deep dive into how are we communicating. Like, you have to read the material that you're communicating with your clients. You have to listen to the calls. You have to, ask questions about how we got here, and then that's how you develop and deploy your plan.
Yeah,
I'd say. Yeah.
If somebody's like me, or a customer's kind of, right now there's a million RFPs out, right? For, I need hosting providers who can provide it. Everybody's looking for cost and capacity. If I'm evaluating providers, you're one of them. What should we be asking that most people don't think to ask?
I suppose one of the things that I've run into relatively frequently is, you know, what's the timeline that I need in order to stand myself up. So, because we have customers that will come to us and they'll say they want it tomorrow, and in many cases we can actually deliver tomorrow, but in some cases it depends on the complexity. It's like, okay, for this to be realistic, we should sit down and walk through how we get as close to tomorrow as possible. It might be the day after or something like that. And then we also have the opposite, where they'll come to us, in December saying that they want to go live in June. And it's like, okay, no problem. But they want to go ahead and start deploying everything. And, that's one of the challenges. They want to stand up the service a little prematurely. And so we have to kind of figure out ways to be creative with them there. So it's asking the question of, when do I really need this? And, what, and how do you want us to engage with you? Do you want us to, provide, management, of your infrastructure, or do you just want us to deploy it for you and then turn it over? I can tell you that I actually had an order come in from a customer probably about 6 months ago. They thought that by, I think just signing up, that they sort of didn't have to do anything. And it was like, well, I understand. And we actually ended up finding a reasonable solution for them, but it was an uncomfortable few conversations, because I was trying to make sure that, they didn't feel this sense of, I don't know what I'm doing, but also, make sure that we weren't overstepping our bounds. Because, there's a lot of environments that we serve that are very security and compliance focused, and we want to make sure that they're adhering to that, and sometimes we even have to tell them, this is, the thing you're doing has more compliance around it than you may realize. And so, so it's things like that, just knowing kind of what they're trying to get into, knowing timing, and, and then just, being transparent if they don't know, so that we can help get them on the right track.
Well, Chris, fascinating conversation. Marty's got to be proud to have you on the team and to have this transformation kind of ongoing, it sounds like, which is really amazing. Everybody's kind of, continuous improvement. So I really like that story, and congratulations again on the award and all the success that you guys are having.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we're going to continue. We'll try to win. Hopefully maybe next year we can transform version 2.0.
That's right.
Yeah.